side.
If you want to read it, Broadway Stars, CBS, January, August 31st, September, it's now, it's on the weekend, it's in the middle of the week. August 31st, September 1st, September 2nd. Listen to the stuff. And then Doubt in November. Doubt by John Patrick Family. Made a movie of it with Phil Tippett and Meryl Streep. Viola Davis won an Oscar. Delightful, heavy, good meaty drama about Catholics.
I know, and I went.
I will be there. It's going to be awesome. And they'll play in front of people. The amphitheater. I saw Pinocchio, a real boy. Oh, that's awesome.
Nice. I had the opposite. I went to Richfield, I saw Squeeze. That was fun. Yeah. That was very fun.
Yeah.
Well, my music stopped after 1987. I don't really know a thing, so. No, I just am not.
I thought the first concert was tonight too.
No. They had REO Speedwagon and Sticks. Like a couple weeks ago. That's just my. I just can't. They did. Oh, you saw Sticks?
Oh, cool.
Oh, good for you. I would have seen Sticks. Yeah, I just. And I'm not a huge Foo Fighters fan. You know what I mean? Like they're just not hitting my stride here. Yeah, that's going to be a big. I mean, that's unusual for those guys doing. I know. What is it? Doesn't seat that many people in it.
11,000?
No. Oh, I thought it was a fraction of that. I thought it was like 2,000.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Town Hall. If you're joining at home, tonight is the August 12th regular meeting of the Board of Finance. If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and just a moment of silence following, that would be great. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Phyllis, you want to do the roll?
Here, in person. Here. Too much? Here. Too much.
Mr. Barker.
Here.
Lady.
Here.
Ewing's here. Okay.
And Christine, you got Christine?
Christine, I'm sorry.
Yes, thanks. Here.
Stand looking
Okay. I don't see anyone here for public comment this evening, so we'll pass on public comment. And I believe on the desk you should find the treasurer's report from our town treasurer. And yes, it should have come by email as well. I'm not sure. I don't believe Anthony's coming this evening. Does anybody have any specific questions that you'd like me to pass along? No? Okay. Mr. Timpanelli, do you want to move the first transfer?
I will. Item number 8-21-01.
Can you just turn on the microphone? At least I didn't have to tell you to mute yourself or unmute yourself this time.
Got it. 8-2101, a transfer from maintenance services in the golf course to maintenance services 578802 from 578801 for a total of $16,000. I move the item.
Second.
Discussion, I think tonight we have Tom Cerulli, and, I'm sorry, I'm so bad with names, Christine Plumeau from the Golf Commission. Yeah?
This item is just to correct an account from last month, 2 months ago. So
So this is just the correction
Yeah,
from
it's
2
just
months
a
ago?
correction.
Okay, then we'll make that one easy, but if you wait 1 second for the next one. So we have before us just a correction, transfer from maintenance services to the 578802 account from the 01 to the 02 account for $16,000. All in favor?
Aye.
That's 6-0. And then you have down that Vin is voting for Steve tonight. So motion passes. All right, Mr. Timpanelli, you're up.
Resolution 8-21-02 is a supplemental appropriation. Also, the Golf Course Commission from retained earnings of $168,000 to maintenance repair services, capital account, maintenance repair services, and salaries full-time for 4 different numbers.
Okay,
I move its adoption.
Second.
thank you, Paul. Thank you, Michael. Okay. Discussion. So I understand there was some work in the capital plan.
Right, so, well, first of all, we had a great year last year, and depending on how the audit comes out, we think we're gonna be over $500,000, so we want to appropriate 168 of that through these 4 motions here. There's some paving work that needs to be done, the lighting system needs to be upgraded, the pro shop and clubhouse, there's some repair work that needs to be done there, and there's an open greenskeeper position that we want to fund for starting on September 1st, I believe. So those are the 4 motions, and we think that we're going to have through the increase in the retained earnings based on whatever the audit comes out, that this is going to be easily covered. If and even if there's some increases in here, it's not going to be an issue. So yeah.
Do you have any idea on how our performance relates to other municipal courses in the region?
I don't think we've actually looked very closely at other courses, but we can say that our course is having essentially a record, well, they had a record year last year due to COVID. I think it's going to be at least that again this year, this fiscal year. The plays, I mean, Christine could speak to that probably a little better than I can in terms of.
So the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021 is the record year.
It was I believe it was a record year, yes. Yeah. And the play on both courses, the Glen and the Knolls, was up significantly last fiscal year over the previous one. And a lot of that had to do with the COVID situation, and being outside was the only thing people could do. Now, it also sparked the interest in golf, which continued into this year, obviously, so, yeah.
Great job.
Elaine, anything?
Yeah. Okay. How much is your retained earnings usually around? Usually, I recall it used to hover about $1 million.
Right around $1 million, I believe, yeah, right?
About $1 million.
The commission goal is to keep it at $1 million.
Okay. And so you'd say, even with this coming out, it'll stay around there, but maybe even be higher with what's coming from last year?
We're at 800,000 right now.
Okay.
But we anticipate earning about, in excess, of course, the audit will tell it, but 550,000.
Okay.
So, we're thinking that we did have a good year.
Yeah, 1.3, take this out of,
Still be
Out of
around
it, you're still
1.1,
gonna be
1.2.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
So this would all be stuff that would be in your next year's budget that you're just moving up, like repair work and stuff, so that you're not waiting on it?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So this is stuff that you would have put into your capital plan if you, like, you didn't anticipate having this money, so you didn't budget for it, but you want to move it up in your cycle, which is why you're asking for it now.
Yes, and a couple of things actually over the winter. Our sprinkler system failed on our outside porch, and it necessitated us taking the entire ceiling down. So there were some expenses that we weren't anticipating. The lightning detection system as well, it kind of suffered some damage this year, and it's fairly important to us. So, some of them weren't on our radar.
Now, I understand that the plan is that you'll come back again next month for an additional sum that has to go back because of some work that's been estimated more than what was approved originally.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Originally, we got a verbal quote of about 30,000. We learned our lightning detection system is 20 years old, over 20 years old, and we learned that the system now has the capability for us to tie in our irrigation system, and when lightning strikes and it gets detected, it will shut off our irrigation system. We suffer from a lot of spikes, power spikes, and have paid countless thousands of dollars. They blow out modems in the computer system there, so it'll automatically shut down our sprinkler system, which will end up really saving us a great deal of money, and it's $10,000. And like I said, this system that we had now lasted us 20 years, so it should more than pay for itself. But we weren't anticipating that added on feature to it. And we're also going to, we did find out too that we can, from our system, we can hook a system onto the pool. And we're gonna pick that cost up too. That was an additional $3,000, but the original system couldn't carry over that far, but now it can. So we've been in contact with Parks and Rec too, and it'll work on the pool.
Well, that's great. Just so everybody's aware, so they had looked to increase the amount that they was requested to transfer, but because it hasn't been voted on by the commission, it'll go back to them for process and come back to us next month. So it'll be on our agenda again, just for another small amount. So it's not being done all at once, okay? Any other questions? All in favor of the supplemental appropriation from the retained earnings for the golf course to the various accounts listed for the sum of $168,000, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, 6-0. Excellent, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll make Joe and Don do it next month.
They both had 2-week vacations, so they're due.
All right. Mr. Timpanelli?
Resolution number 8-2103 to 8-2113. These are various directors' transfers totaling $3,414, and the schedule appears about 10 or 12 pages into your hard copy packet. I move its adoption.
Second.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Paul. Discussion. Maria, you want to walk through some of this?
They're very small items, just transfers. Like the first one is between library, the service contracts to just repairs and maintenance, $431. Economic development, professional services, seminars, transfer $500 to program expenses. We use some of that funding to support small business. Tax assessor from professional services, seminars, $1,000 to capital outlay to purchase some chairs. They had new staffing come to the office and they needed new chairs. Trumbull Nature Center, it's just the heat account, transfer $60 to the clerical. They had an extra meeting. Board of Finance, legal notices, transferred $125 to professional development dues of $125. Conservation Commission, service and fees, $15, transferred to public reports. Dog warden, just between electricity and heat, $156. Emergency management, again, some utilities from heat, $848 to water, $616, and telephone, $232. Health department, phone public immunization, $540 to postage for $13, and capital outlay, $527. I think it was for a refrigerator, if I'm not mistaken. Non-public school, from seminars, $51, to program supplies, $51. And the counseling center, from electricity to heat, $88, for a total of $3,414.
And just to be clear, these are all the transfers that fall underneath the threshold that you can make the transfers, and then we just approve them following, just to do that. Any questions for Maria?
And
and it's not on these, it's just when will we still be seeing additional larger transfers to close out the last fiscal year?
Yes, you'll be seeing large transfers and possibly a couple supplementals like the snow removal and the tree wardens accounts, which we've talked about in the past.
Okay, and when do you expect that? Next month?
Next month.
Okay, thank you.
Will you go over some of that when we get to the year-to-date stuff? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So, going back to the first page, the motion before us is transfers from the Directors of Finance to various accounts as seen in attached Scheduled A. And those are motions 82103 to 82113, and the total amount is $3,414. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So the motion passes 6-0. Okay. Discussion items. So a couple of quick things. Auditor's job description, I just wanted to take a moment to send and extend a thanks for her service to Therese Keegan, who offered her resignation last month to pursue some family things and some much-needed time off that she has well-deserved. So that job description has been prepared by the HR department and posted. I did reach out to each of you individually to ask for your input to make sure there wasn't anything. There was some good feedback as far as additions that we thought we might like to make. I know that Vin, you had asked specifically about having something in there about periodic reports, updating us as to where, once a recommendation has been made, where we'd like to see follow-through from our departments. And Tom McCarthy sent back that it really does fall into the job description as written, that if we added something that it would have had to go to the union for approval. I think that's something that when we're making the hire, that we'll be able to really discuss and outline our expectations a little bit better. I think it was a little bit harder with COVID and being out of the building to really define some of that. So I think that that was a pretty good place to start the discussion. Did anybody have any questions about the job description or where we are in that? I believe it was posted this week.
What's the process going to be?
As far as I'm aware, in my discussions with Tom McCarthy, it will be posted until it is filled. So we'll leave it as continuous on the posting. And when he has applicants for us to interview, we'll schedule the interviews. So our hope would be to be able to do it within the next month or so, depending on the applicants, but we can leave the application live if there were others to come in.
And do you anticipate the entire board interviewing the candidates?
I would like so. I think that's how we handled it when Therese was hired. I don't know how you all feel about that. It's entirely up to how you guys want to handle it.
Well, what's the first step on the candidate selection process? Will Tom winnow the candidate numbers down to an agreed-to number?
I haven't talked with him. We had it set to be posted, and we will kind of finalize that. He's away on vacation for this week, and when he comes back, I can certainly ask him as far as that. I'm not sure how many applications we would anticipate for the position. I would think that if we let it go for 6 weeks and we don't have a sufficient number, that perhaps then we can talk about something else. I can't see us having hundreds of applications for this job. I think we had a little bit of trouble getting applications when Therese was hired.
Different market. I guess we'll see what happens.
So I think then we can really have some discussions about what our expectations are and how we want to handle that. I'd like to see us maybe have a little bit more guidance and utilize that position a little bit more. I think we could probably come up with some ways to tighten it up a little bit. Anybody? Elaine?
No, I'm assuming he'll give us a limited number that he's winnowed through that, and then we can, it might be best if we all just take a look at it and see if there's something in a particular resume that says to us, this really wouldn't be, the kind of background we want. And then if we can narrow it down, hopefully we're not going to be interviewing more than a half dozen candidates.
Yeah, I think we had 4 or 5 interviews
Yeah.
when we hired Therese. this changeover will be a really good opportunity for us to figure out how we want to follow up when recommendations are made. I think Therese had done some great work and made some really strong recommendations, and things that were easy to follow through on, were done very well, but what's the process when, things are out there for a long time and haven't been addressed, and how do we make sure that who's, the chain of responsibility and stuff. I think that'll be good time to really look at that. Anything else on the internal auditor? Okay.
Is there something we wanted to change on the rules of procedure related to the internal auditor? I think there was something that was discussed about that.
Going to
That would be the second page, item 8 and 9.
in your packets, you should have, it'll say page 1 of 15 is the Financial Accounting Controls Analyst, the Board of Finance. This is the job description, and then the rules of procedures. Vin, I believe section 8 may be where we want to add the quarterly, more specific about a quarterly report.
That'd be a good spot.
Marty?
One second. What am I doing? I am at practice. Why is it going?
At the face.
I hit it. I get it. Can you hear me? Oh, now it's going. Okay. I think there's two things happening. One, I agree with the idea that we can tighten the process on our review. But I think the other thing that we need to make happen is work with the department heads and get their buy-in to what the follow-up's going to be here. Because the auditor is going to identify things that need to be done. And we have this longer list of, okay, we've identified these issues that the department heads then need to take ownership of, and we need kind of reporting back to us to ensure that's happening. Because it's out, once the report is done, to some degree, it's out of that auditor's control. So I think I'd like to have some discussion on that as a follow-up on how the auditor's findings and the department heads are going to work with us. So maybe it's quarterly, we're having department heads come in and discuss where they are as well, in some way. Because it's out of this person's control. They identify issues, and we have this list of follow-ups, and some of these follow-ups go on for a long period of time. And the department heads need to own this.
So maybe how we're tracking it quarterly to say these are the departments that we're going to want to see to follow up on that.
Yeah, just I mean, if we get agreement, if the auditor gets agreement on, and usually Therese did, usually had agreement with the department heads of these are the agreed upon actions and the timing. At that part, the auditor should be done, and now the department head owns this. And we should be having tracking with the department head of closing out the issues. So I'd like to think about how that's going to work.
It's kind of project management, really. Like, it's kind of like that, having a project management discipline around what the findings are and like the sort of the punch list and going through them. Yeah.
Elaine?
But the problem is, and I think it's something that frustrated Therese all the time, is she has no control over the department. So she goes through all the time and effort and makes an audit, and she has recommendations. She gives them to the department, and then they give her lip service. They buy into it, and then they never do anything. And she has absolutely, and the new person has no authority to make them do it. I've always said that as part of their budget review, we should pull their audit in and sit it down and say, how did you do? You're asking us for money, and you're not taking care of what you should have been doing. Because again, it's a carrot and stick, and we have authority only once, and that is at budget time. And when that passes, they can kind of thumb your nose at you. And if you look at some of the audits and you look at how long some of the recommendations have been sitting with nothing being done.
Well, I think some of it's a tracking, like how we follow up on it to make sure that it does, and then maybe working with the First Selectman's office a little bit more to have, these are the things that we have concerns on coming up, and how, best to kind of track it so that we have more of that oversight, I think.
I think the one thing you could ask the new auditor to do is just keep spreadsheet that she sends out quarterly that just says, I audited Department ABC, here are the 10 recommendations. And not even repeat them, just recommended, there were 10. 1 is done, 2 is not, 3 is done, and we can,
That was the intent. That was the intent of what I thought should be in the job description.
Yeah, okay.
To try and get some follow-up and some
Right.
closure on things as opposed to leave everything open-ended, because being on here for a while, we see it being open-ended and then they just go into the ether.
Yeah. I think the one thing that Tom McCarthy said was that that is inherently implied in that whatever reports we ask of the auditor, she reports to us, or they report to us. So that doesn't necessarily need to be in their job description. I think Maria thought it maybe needs to be in our rules of procedure.
That's fine. As
So-
long as it's there someplace to kind of,
Okay.
yeah, I'm not even sure we need it. I mean, I assume this is our exact existing rules of procedure.
Yes, this is the
So,
current ones.
I'm not sure we need to change anything other than, since it says the analyst is gonna provide the reports we ask for, we make that the quarterly report, and understand that it will, take the auditor a significant amount of time to go back, track through every old audit that they've done for the past 12 months.
Yeah.
And find out the status. So it's almost like a mini audit of everything they've done.
I think that that'll be on us then, when we establish what our expectations are of whomever we hire, is that these are the reports that we'd like, and maybe we'll just need to make a more formal list so that we're following up and it's kind of written somewhere. Go ahead.
So if I can just jump in, to me, there are two things. So I completely agree with Vin's idea of having this process in place, but again, I think it moves after the management agrees to take it. It moves from the auditor's responsibilities to the department heads, and what we're missing today is the follow-up with the department heads periodically to make sure they're being worked on, right? So if they agree at the time of the audit they're gonna do these 5 things, or whatever happens, with the time frame associated with it, then we should have either it's closed and the auditor says everything's closed, or it's not closed, and we should have a discussion with the department head of what happened, because we had agreement, and for some reason things don't close. So all I'm saying is we need to just add a new small piece to this process on the follow-up. It's out of the auditor's control, and so after somebody agrees to it and they agree to the timing, we need a follow-up. And I would suggest that we're doing it more frequently just at the budget, because at the budget, it's already 2 full days of meetings. We barely have time to go through what their objectives are to start with. So I would have a separate time. I'm just recommending that we add a small change, an additional meeting, that we're gonna go through this.
Well, I think that where our section for the auditors report every month, that maybe we have a subset that we say, auditors follow up with whatever department we decide needs its time to do
2 or
that.
3 departments.
So if we keep a schedule to do that, and I think that that would just be more organizational for us, and not something that we've done, in the past more formally like that. So just be a better tracking mechanism. You wrote that down, right, Phyllis? That sounded good.
I addressed one concern that came up, was that possibly, well, one is that the Board of Ed needs to be audited as well. And I think they were very resistant for the auditor to come in, more times than not. As most of the audits were on the town side. Very few are on the Board of Ed side, and they have 70% of the budget. So I think there needs to be a buy-in by the Board of Ed that this person will be going over there as well, and that they have to be receptive to the audits, just like we are all part of that. The other thing that came up with discussion with Therese was that some towns or cities have a subcommittee of the Board of Finance to actually review the reports in detail, instead of kind of wasting the Board of Finance time at the regular meeting. And I don't think those are televised, which I don't know if that's something that this board would like to look into.
Well, maybe a subcommittee then could do the piece of the tracking.
yeah, that's a good idea. That
So-
sounds like a good idea.
So let's think about how we would do that. That's a good thought.
Can I make one more comment?
Yep, you can make any more comments.
Related to what you were just saying on the Board of Ed piece, the one meeting I missed on the May 13th in the minutes, I noticed that there was a comment with regard to the auditor's report and maybe there's new information here. It said the Board of Ed has not made progress on open items that have been in process since the previous administration. Ms. Keegan indicated she had contacted them, however, they are not responding. So I don't know if that overlapped with the audit, or this is outside the audit. It's just, I wasn't here, and so as I was reading through the minutes, I was kind of surprised to read that.
So there was the operational audit that was done by the town council. Therese was in process working on the Board of Ed purchasing department audit, like their policies and procedures as far as purchasing. I think that's what that's in regards to. Am I correct, Maria?
Yes, and it was never completed. It was never completed because they were never able to meet and get their management response. How are they going to correct the action?
I was most reacting to this idea that they weren't responding. Obviously, that's an issue that will have to get resolved, so.
They were responding, they just didn't have the information that she wanted. So they did respond to her, they did
Okay.
not answer her, they just did not have available to her the information that she needed to complete the audit.
That's better.
That was my understanding.
Okay.
I don't know if that's better, if she was looking for,
Well, it's,
you know,
at least they were
documentation and it
communicating.
wasn't there. And, you know, it was, they're working on that and to do that. So hopefully, as we get back in, if we can come up with a better schedule of what we want the auditor to be working on,
Yeah.
I think that we'll be able to tighten that up a little bit.
There are some times, or some items, when the internal auditor audits something, it's appropriate that he or she do both the Board of Ed and the town at the same time. One of the first audits she did had to do with participation in the medical plan. And it was the individual participating actually eligible, and were the dependents that were listed actually eligible? And that's a logical thing, and it goes to both sides. We're in the same medical plan. She did another audit regarding the pension, because any non-certified staff on the Board of Ed side is in the town pension. And so sometimes there are things that the auditor can do that it is very likely and makes sense for her or him to do both sides. The auditor's focused on a lot of cash management departments on the town side, but I'm guessing there's some cash coming in on the Board of Ed side, and I don't think we've ever audited that.
No, those are those legacy accounts and the special
Special
agency
accounts.
accounts that they have as well.
Right. It's a question of it's just procedure to understand that there are procedures in place. As she said, on this side, sometimes money sits too long before it's deposited in the bank. The certain basic procedures apply on both sides, so there really isn't a difference that you would do something differently on one side and not the other. And I don't it was generally never comfortable when she tried to do the other one.
No, although the new administration has been receptive to that, I think then, with COVID and limited people in the building and communication, that's when things kind of fell apart as far as that. The information I think that she was looking for that purchasing audit was information from the first half of 2020 prior to them coming in, so.
Yeah, I would just like to say on the record, my experience with the new administration has been good. So I'm hopeful as we work with the new administration that will continue to, be one of cooperation.
So let me just kind of recap. For our next meeting, if you guys want to take a look a little bit more closely at the rules of procedure, again, if you have any suggestions, something wording wise that in that section 8 that we might want to change as far as that, let's look a little more closely about whether or not we would want to do a subcommittee type setup or just a different way of looking at the auditor's report and tracking. We're such a small Board of Finance. Some communities have larger boards. I think that maybe that's where they have a subcommittee, but we can figure out how best to manage that. I don't think that changes our rules of procedure very much unless we were to add a subcommittee, so. Okay, so we'll come back to that, and if you have any thoughts, if you just want to send them before the next meeting, and we'll add it for discussion as well. Anything else on the internal auditor job description or our rules of procedure? All right, now for the fun stuff, Maria. let's talk year-to-date, budget to actual, and you've got both the close of the fiscal year 2021 and the new fiscal year 22.
Yeah, fiscal year 21-22 is not, 2021 is not complete, but it's getting close to. By the end of the year, we should be completed with all the invoices that are still coming in. But this is a good indication where we're gonna end up,
By the end of the month or by,
by the end of this month.
oh, you said the end of the year. I was like,
Sorry.
that's a long time.
I apologize.
That's okay.
So by next month, we'll be coming to the board for final transfers and supplementals.
Do you have a rough idea where we're going to fall as far as surplus or?
I don't wanna give numbers now, but I believe based on what I looked at and more current reports than this one presented here, it looks like we should be on a plus side. Actually, we may not be able to need to use the fund balance that we set aside last year when we put this budget together. The Board of Ed is returning, according to the financials I received today, $975,000. That's their surplus. And if you look at the page, page 18, I'm not sure what page you have there, Elaine, maybe it's the actual printout is on page 18. And it's, you will see education, the 01-0600. It's $1.7 million in this report. So from that $1.7 million, we returned $271,000 from that excess education cost. We had originally budgeted zero revenue on the town side because we were on the assumption that we would have to return every dollar that we received from the state back to the Board of Ed. Well, we only had to return $271,000. In addition, they have approximately $1 million in accounts payable, which is year-end invoices for last year that probably will be paid this year, most likely will be paid this year. So that's approximately $1 million. So it comes down to about, they gave me an amount of $975,000. That would be their surplus.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I guess when we have the chance, either they come before us or with additional documentation. When we had our conversations in May, I was thinking there'd be a significantly larger surplus coming back to our side. And so I'm a little puzzled about that. I know they put a significant amount of money into the lunch account, but it seemed to far exceed the deficit. Right, it far exceeded the deficit, and they put money into special revenue. They did into TD Bank. I don't know if people had a chance to review the document that came out today for their Board of Ed meeting coming up on Tuesday. They talked about that. They talked about, we just did $3,000 of little transfers. I know you have larger transfers coming. They're literally proposing to do $13 million of transfers, which is just, again, I can't understand how that's a possibility. So I think I just have a lot of questions understanding what's happening. As far as I understand, they have not had a finance meeting, which the audit talked about doing monthly. They haven't had that in at least, I believe, 3 months. We just did this audit.
Yeah. No, they had a meeting in June. Their July meeting was canceled. I believe they have a meeting.
You're certain they did one in June?
I think June 24th was their last finance committee meeting. I'm pretty sure. I'd have to look.
In any case, I thought the audit talked about doing them monthly. And, there could be great explanations of why they're moving around $13.5 million. It's, if we had a budget like that and you were proposing to move $13.5 million, I think I'd have a lot of questions for you.
Wouldn't be coming to this meeting.
So I have a lot of questions in general. So there's a question with regard to all the movement of that money, and there's a question what happened. I thought we had a $2 million surplus that's not coming back. So it's been applied differently, and there's, before we get into this lapsing or non-lapsing account, I think we're gonna need, I'm sure we all have a lot of questions in understanding where is all that money. If we thought we were getting this amount, we were gonna apply a piece of it to the non-lapsing, where's the rest of the money? And so there's a lot of questions that I think we'll have to get into.
I think Vin, also you had some concerns about what their plan is with the TD Bank,
yes.
TD Bank money as far as.
The refresh of equipment, and
Can
that
you-
was, the intent of this leasing of the equipment was to refresh the equipment on a periodic basis every so many years and continue to keep the equipment fresh, as opposed to letting it be bought and kind of accumulate over time and then be out of date. So that was back from the report that was done, the educational report. How many years ago was that, Elaine?
That's the Gibson report?
The Gibson report. And that was part of the report, to say that it was a good idea to refresh the equipment on a regular basis. So that was the intent of those leases. I'm not sure which leases they're addressing in the changes, but that may be the ones they're talking about. I don't know.
I know when we had discussions about establishing the MOU for the non-lapsing account, that we would be intending to set up a non-lapsing account, that they talked about using that payoff as part of their one-time expenditures that they were looking to cover. So if they've already paid it, I'm not sure what else they have in this expenditure that they want to hold over in a non-lapsing account. So I want to see where they fall with that. And Maria, is it unusual to have $1 million in accounts payable at the last month? Would that be supplies that they're pre-buying? Would that be?
I would say it's large, but I'm not worth that, so I'm not sure what kind of expenses
Okay.
they're buying.
So,
The other thing, just as a reminder for us, in their budget that we approved, they had, I can't remember the exact amount, but somewhere in the range of $350,000 from the operating budget was going into special revenue accounts.
430.
430, right, 430. And so they made transfers off the surplus into the special revenue account. Is the 430,000 that we had in our operating budget I'm just confused about this, and I want to have some time to really sit down and have them walk us through what's happening before we set up that other non-lapsing account, because I am confused.
Maybe we can ask them to present that to us next month and explain what their year-end movement was. I saw an article the other day. I was going to send it to everyone on the board, and maybe some of you have seen it. McKinsey did a study to determine how much in general students across the country have lost in the way of learning, and I forget the terminology they used, but they were saying, I think it was something like 4 months on average in reading and 5 or 6 months on average in math. And there's some discrepancy among racial backgrounds, but the loss is across the board. And I would certainly like an explanation of how we're going to address that, because that's certainly what the federal funds are supposed to address. So I'd like to know it. And I understand the last time we asked this question, they weren't sure what the extent of that loss is. And I'm not sure until they get back to school they're having enough opportunity to actually measure it. But I don't see why we would be tremendously off a national study. And so I'd be curious as to how they're going to try to remediate some of this.
Yeah, I think actually I would hope that we were a little bit ahead of the national study, given where we start from, giving our starting point. But I also know that we, when set up the budget this year, that we did not touch any of the federal stimulus money that they were getting for COVID relief.
Right.
We purposely did not include that in their operating budget that we were approving, so that if they had to hire additional staff or tutors to do that, that we were preserving those funds for that purpose.
Actually, I thought we did use some of it, but I still would like to see, no matter how we're funding it,
Yeah.
what the plan is.
Yeah.
That's really more where I'm coming from. Right now, I'm not sure I care about where the money came from. I want to understand what it is they're going to do. And even if we are better than the national average and we're 3 months and 5 instead of 4 and 6, there's still some fairly well documented loss. And, it's certainly a concern.
Elaine, are you certain that national study was a McKinsey study, so
Yes.
that we can look it up?
I can send you the link.
Could you?
A friend of mine who's a Georgetown professor mentioned it, and he actually gave me the link.
Good, that'd be great.
So I'll send that link to everyone, because he commented on it, but then in his article, he actually cited it and gave me the link. So I'll send that to everybody.
Good.
Marty?
Yeah, and again, to be clear, I'm just much more concerned about process than I am. I agree with you, and I'm glad we didn't, that they have that money available to deal with this. I mean, it's a challenging issue, no doubt, it's a challenging issue. But from a process standpoint, I kind of want to get to the bottom of this, of what's happening. I don't understand how you have $13 million of transfers at the end of the year. I don't, you know, I know we had a change in administration. It's not the new administration, and I know there's a lot happening, but I am very confused about that. And I just want to understand where I thought we had a larger surplus, we have a lower surplus. We just need to get to the bottom of the numbers. Numbers are the numbers. Let's agree and hopefully get back on a process. Why they're doing these transfers without going through their finance committee, again, is distressing. I mean, we went through this whole process with an audit to agree on how we're going to operate. And we had that meeting where everyone said they're going to follow these new procedures, and it's barely 3 months later. So listen, I hope we can get to the bottom of it and agree and have a good process moving forward, but I think there's a lot that we all have to understand.
I agree. Any other questions on our year-to-date? Paul, your light's on. Did you have a question?
I do not.
Okay. Maria, anything else you want to highlight for us?
Just the other deficit, which would be the tree warden, which is on page 22 for $161,000. It's nothing new that we haven't discussed before. And the same thing with the snow account was $80,000. A lot of the departments are returning quite a bit of money because of COVID. We didn't do as much. So there is actually a lot of surpluses in different departments, so that's a good thing. Something came good out of this, I guess.
Okay.
And I don't know if you want to go through the revenue,
Yep.
which I wanted to highlight the fact that we received $1.1 million from the state regarding the excess ECS, and we only gave the Board of Ed $271,000 based on their request. I'll have to find it here. It's towards the end. And you didn't get the same reports that you received in the past just because Dan was on vacation, and I don't know cube reports, so I couldn't do them the same way. So I apologize for that.
Any question on the revenue report?
I want to point out,
I just have one question. Maria, you said that we got more back from the state in special ed costs.
yes. So ECS, if you remember, in the budget process, we budget 0 as the special excess cost, the excess cost. And because we know that the Board of Ed can come back to us and we have to submit back to them the amount that they overexpended above their budget. We received $1.1 million and they only came back for $271,000.
But they expended the $1.1 million on students.
I'm sure they did.
Which is why we got, okay. I guess
Because
I'd like,
It's a different formula, yeah.
yeah, I guess I'd still like them to explain, as part of all this money, how do you, no,
Okay.
I don't mean to make it sound that way. You spend this much because you need to on children with special needs. How you get there is whatever they need. But how can you find that in your budget? And the idea is the state's gonna give it back to us when that happens to equalize special ed costs. So how do they utilize over $1 million and only ask for 200, 300,000 back?
So I think there's two different pieces, though.
Okay.
It's you have your special ed reimbursement, which we get a set amount, plus your excess cost
Right.
is for those students that cost them 40% above their budgeted amount per student.
Right.
So that's what they calculated as their excess cost, was the
Right.
$271.
But
That money always remains on the town side, right, Maria?
no, I understand that the state gives it to us, and then we give it to them to cover what they spent. What I am confused about is if they spent over $1 million, why they only needed less than 300,000 back from us.
But
I think it's sorry to interrupt.
But let me get the thought out. Correct me if this is my logic is, they told us in their budget that they were gonna spend X number of dollars, because they guesstimate what their special education costs are. So we give them their operating budget. Their excess cost is what they're asking over it. So the
So they
state gave
built
us the
in-
$1 million,
Got it.
but that was already the money that we had budgeted for. That excess cost we're giving them is over what we had
Over and
budgeted
above
for
what
them.
they budgeted. So they thought they were going to, for round numbers, say, spend $1 million, and they budgeted $1 million, we gave them $1 million, they spent $1.2 million,
Right.
So they only needed the 2 back, but this, because all that amount was over and above the 40% threshold,
Right.
the state gave it back to us.
Right, so,
Now I
so
get it.
they're saying that that money is money that we're banking, but we already spent that money when we gave them their operating budget.
And-
I think that's the misconception that people get upset.
And I think one of the reasons we stopped, Maria, correct me, budgeting it is it's such a wild card that we'll throw our revenues off.
Right, yeah, I think we've had that trouble before, because you
Yes.
you could never count on it, because the PPTs don't happen till the spring, so their special education costs don't come in until well after they're budgeted. So that's where the outliers are.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think a good part of this, it's a timing issue, so that makes it more complicated.
And understanding that we've already given them
Right.
a piece of that money was
It's
my
just the
missing piece.
excess.
Yep.
It's just the excess of they already budgeted for.
It's the state reimbursing us, which we are giving them to the Board of Ed. It just comes in through the town side, but we've already spent that money. It's not extra money to us.
Right.
It's money that we already laid out. We're reimbursing the Board of Education for their excess costs because the state gave it to us.
But in theory,
Mhm.
if we ever could get comfortable with the number, if we could look historically and see what do they put in their budget every year for excess special ed versus what they actually spend. And we were to not give it to them in their regular budget and then give it to them
At the
when
end.
we've been reimbursed by the state, because then, in theory, we have put $1 million into our budget that we did not need to do, and we taxed on $1 million that we did not need.
Yeah, I
It's
think
just
some
a
of the
wild
problem.
card to try to catch.
Well, some of the problem also with special education reimbursement is not only are they so far out in doing that, but I don't think the state reimburses all of the cost.
No,
to
but
us.
it's a
It's only a
certain amount,
portion.
it's what we spend over and above a certain amount for each student. And I think the wild card becomes if someone moves in or out that they weren't counting on, that throws it off.
Or if they have one of the outplacements.
Or an outplacement that they weren't expecting that becomes a high expense.
Well, maybe we'll see a change now that they have a new director of special education and they're changing some of their focus and how to do that. I think they're trying to bring some of their programming back in-house, I think is some of what I've been following. Maybe they'll be able to have a better, forecast of what it'll cost.
And I know they have talked over the years about trying to certainly bring as much in-house as possible. But if it were possible, I'd like to see a report that goes back 5 or 10 years and just says, this is what we had estimated and therefore what we budgeted for excess costs. And this is what it actually ended up.
I think when they were doing some of the operational audit, that there was some concern that there were pieces of the records that weren't clear to them doing the operational audit as far as special education costs and the records. I can ask for a report like that. How would you like me to phrase that?
I think that every year in their budget, there must be a line for excess special education. And what is that number? When they first start, what's the number they put there? And then what is the number on the piece of paper they ultimately submitted to the state for the year?
Right, well, they submit twice a year, Maria. So they submit in May and they submit like October, I think.
Well, can I add one thing? I think the challenge, again, back to the timing issue, I think when they're going through the budget, it's an educated guess and it doesn't become real until January, February for them. So I think part of the reason we need to forward the money to them is because this is such a, they can't afford, like if it's too low and they don't get it back in time, then they have a budget issue.
No, I'm sorry, and I don't want it to sound like I'm critical of how they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I understand that it's so far out of their control. I just want to get a sense what we normally think will happen versus what happened. Are we off by a huge amount? I don't mean that to be critical of their estimate because they do the best they can.
I think the timing that's going to be interesting would be the estimate at budget time, and then the estimate when much more information is known, say in February, and then calculate what we actually got. Are we doing, because both are, it's really hard at budget time to estimate what's going to happen because you don't know who's moving in or out, to your point. And then by February, when it's kind of locked, we should know it's past the budget time, but are we at least calculating what we think is going to happen? Are we good at knowing what numbers coming in?
It's more of an academic, it's not an attempt at saying they're not doing a good job about something.
Yeah.
I don't mean that at all. I'm just,
Do you want me to ask for that, see if they can do something like that
Yeah.
now? Do we want that to be something that when we hire an internal auditor, we have them do as one of their,
I don't care, we can do it either way. They may be able to say, there's no way we can get at that, or they may have an idea. All I'm trying to understand is how far off, this is a huge year. We're getting back 1 million, they need 200 of it. And that's fine. I'd like to explain it to them and then ask them, what do they think they can give us to show it? Unless Maria's got numbers earlier on.
They gave me a report totaling the 271, so they gave me the budget amount and they gave me the actuals. What they didn't provide me with is the salaries. The salaries are in part of the salary section, because I asked a question, I said, I believe the expense is much higher than this. And what they told me is the salaries are in the other side of the budget. So they're only asking me, or asking the town, for the amount that went over on all the other expenses related to the special ed.
I guess.
is that unusual that they're asking for it that way?
I mean, they're asking for what they need, and it's
I'm not questioning, I don't
Yeah.
think, we want to send them more than they need. I just want to know, are they asking for it differently this year than they have in the past?
No, and to get back to your, issue before, Elaine, back a few years, we actually budget 650,000.
Can you just turn the microphone back on?
Sorry.
A few years back, we actually budget 600 or so thousand in the regular budget, that the revenue was staying with the town because they didn't need it. And I think because they had some large cases the last few years, and that's the reason we had to just budget 0, because we didn't anticipate getting anything back. They're going to go over.
I think they started changing the budget number for that when they were anticipating waiting until the excess cost came back. There was the year they removed, I think it was either 1.3 or 1.6 million, they reduced that. And the number that they needed back at the end of the year was the 1.6. So they had done something there. I'd have to go back and look at, I want to say it was the last year, because I think Mr. D'Onofrio made that motion at the meeting, because we were talking about the excess cost, so I would have to look at that.
I'd say what would be helpful for me anyway, would kind of be a one-page tutorial on this, right? So we make our initial budget at this point in time. Then we have more information at this point in time, and we submit all our data, and we know what the number is gonna be here. I'm suspecting part of the reason they didn't, they needed all that money, they spent the $1 million. We know they had a large surplus, so maybe some of the surplus helped them pay the bills for that. That's done, and maybe we can consider this piece part of the surplus. Maybe that's why it's working out this year. Again, I'm kind of confused on the timing of how the money is moving around, so I'd like to make sure I don't really understand this piece either. So, a one-pager on, here's when we're originally estimating it, here's where it's better, and here's, how the timing of the money comes back into us from the state and from the town, and this is how we're budgeting. Because again, this is one I'm a little confused.
I know in the past they've mentioned that they can literally suddenly end up with one placement that blows that budget away, and they have no way of knowing what's coming. And so I get that, so like I said, I'm not trying at all to be critical about how they do that. Like you, I just want to understand, is there a better way for us to anticipate this or budget it? That's all.
Would it be something that we would create a reserve account, like you would do for insurance that ran over, where if they had an excessive year that we were, would that be something?
But sooner or later, if they run that far over, they do get it from the state. There is just the lag.
Right.
And Maria covers the lag if they're having a problem anyway,
Right.
because we know we're gonna get it from the state eventually. So
Okay.
a reserve account wouldn't necessarily, a reserve account wouldn't,
Because the cost doesn't fall to us
yeah,
then.
the cost doesn't come back.
Okay.
At the end of any year, it should all balance out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? No?
Okay, thank you.
All right, so some good stuff to think about, and I will phrase that, Elaine, and send it to you to see if it's okay, if I'm asking the right question.
In the meantime, I'll ask for that same report that I received today, which, like I said, it did not have the salaries, but it did have all the other expenses. I can ask for the last few years. See if
Okay.
they can provide it to us.
Okay, well, so let's see if that information is what you want, and then from there, we can ask them to clarify it. Okay, so the last thing on our agenda tonight is just approval of the minutes from our May 13th meeting, as well as our June 14th meeting. So, if you'll just take a moment to look at the minutes, if I could have a motion to accept the minutes for the May 13th regular meeting of the Board of
So
Finance.
moved.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mr. Barker. Any corrections? All in favor of accepting the minutes from the May 13th meeting as noted?
Aye.
I need to abstain, I wasn't here.
Thank you. So, Elaine? So it'll be 5-0-1.
6, I was on it.
You were not here
I
also?
was there.
He
Right, but
voted
he's
to,
abstaining.
Oh, he's
So
abstaining.
it's 5 yeses, no noes, and a not voting.
Right.
5-0-1. I actually did it right this time. All right, looking at the June 14th minutes,
I have one comment.
yes?
Not a change, but just a follow-up for us. It indicates,
Well, can somebody make the motion to
oh,
accept?
sorry,
So
sorry.
moved.
Paul and Elaine, thank you. Oh, never mind.
Second.
Michael, I tried, Elaine. I know,
Okay.
it's teamwork. All
Now,
right, now, Marty, you have discussion?
Yeah, not a change per se, just it kind of reminded me of the fact that the first selectman was gonna set up a committee on how to use that $650,000. So maybe at the next meeting, we can have a discussion about that.
Okay,
Madam Chairman,
yes, ma'am.
I had a
Sir.
possible edit, yes, sir, ma'am, whatever.
Yep.
On the same line, the verb manage, I think, doesn't capture what the first selectman had suggested the committee would be for. I think it's more like make recommendations around, something like that.
Okay, so we're gonna strike the word, a motion to strike the word manage and make it, wait, we don't need a motion. Do we have to vote on that, or can we just make it? We have to vote an amendment. He wants to make the amendment to that.
Just do it by unanimous consent.
Everybody okay with that? Unanimous consent, that we're gonna change the word manage to,
I think make recommendations around, or make recommendations for the use of, whichever you prefer.
make recommendations for the use
Marty
of
likes the latter, make recommendations for the use of.
the 400,000 along with the additional. Is that okay? Of the, yes. Phyllis would like it noted in next year's budget, she'd like to be paid by the word. I know, it was just funny, it was just be funny. Okay. And then all in favor of accepting the minutes for the June 14th meeting as noted?
Aye.
And you're abstaining. 5-0-1, Elaine is abstaining because she was absent. That's the one we almost sent out the military cavalry. So, okay. Who would like to make the Mr. Ward motion? Move to adjourn.
Second.
Unanimous consent, everybody can go home. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Don't forget your marshmallow cleanup.
Eat the rest of us.
Happy National S'mores Day.